The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everybody. This is Monica Main, and welcome to my presentation on the economic changes as I forecast them for the year of 2018. So I'm glad you're able to make it with me to this last presentation that I'm doing for Viper Wealth for this year. And I just want to preliminarily wish all of you a happy, healthy, prosperous, new year that's coming up. I can't wait. I know I'm skipping over Christmas in my mind, but that's because most of you probably know that I can't stand Christmas that much. And so I'm just kind of biting the bullet until it's over. Let's just put it that way. But in a couple days, I'm going to be off to the big island of Hawaii, and that's where I'll be spending for the vast majority of the days leading up to Christmas, and then I will be back by Christmas Eve to get through it and then be on to the new year. So I hope that you guys are prepared because we have a very interesting 2018 coming up on a variety of different fronts, politically, economically, even if you want to get into the spiritual stuff, the metaphysical spiritual stuff as well. I think 2017 was a very pivotal year, I think, for women rising above and rising up, and it's probably going to continue on in that direction. And also, too, it feels like things are speeding up. And it's just going to get faster and faster as we go along. There's going to be some economic slow-ups that we're going to see in 2018 coming up. Also, too, some shifts that I want all of you to start thinking about, not just for 2018, but for the next 10 to 20 years as we start moving outward, because there are going to be some changes. In fact, one of the changes actually hit me today as I was talking to one of my staff members about Mexico and how I would love to have a manufacturing facility in Mexico, because it seems like all of the Mexicans that I know that, well, actually the ones that come from Mexico that work here in the United States are extremely hardworking individuals. And, economically, it's just very difficult to be able to make a manufacturing business here in the United States work. I know Donald Trump knows it. I know anybody who's ever had a manufacturing plant or has tried to have a manufacturing plant here in the United States knows it. And, you just can't make the numbers work if you want to produce things on a mass scale for the American consumer. And so I was telling one of my staffers today, I think it would be awesome to actually take a manufacturing plant and put it into Mexico, because there's no way you'd ever get harder, faster workers than that. And it got me thinking about the next generation coming up. And we have our millennials, which are already adults. So many of them are already adults. And then we have Generation Z, which is my daughter's generation, which is anyone born 2005 and later falls into Generation Z. So I don't know how Generation Z is going to turn out. It's all depending on how well the millennials actually raise their kids. I'm a Gen Xer, and I have a Gen Z baby because I started later on. But my daughter has some very good, portrayals of how work ethic has to be played out. Now, whether or not she's going to do that or not is another thing altogether, because these kids are being raised in a completely different environment, especially American kids, where everything is as easy as the push of a button, or demanding, or expecting. And, things are going to be difficult as they get older. But I was starting to think about how the next 10 to 20 years are going to unfold. In 10 years, my daughter will be in the workplace, and so will every millennial will be in the workplace by then. Every Gen, or most of your Gen Zs, will be in the workplace within the next 10 to 20 years. And these kids don't want to do anything, nothing. And so now, if you think about the Mexico idea of having a manufacturing plant down there, that concept in and of itself becomes much more valuable than it is right now today. And the reason being is because our American kids, millennials, and our Gen Zs, they're going to come up into the workplace. They're all pretty much lazy, or the vast majority, because everybody always comes up to me and says, oh, well, there's this one person who I know that's a millennial that's not lazy. Well, there's this one Gen Z that I know that's not. Okay, that's great. So one person out of a million is not lazy. That's not going to be enough to carry an entire population or an entire workforce, is that one exception to the rule. And so our baby boomers are retiring out. Generation my generation, Generation X, we're in our 40s, 50s. We're going to be starting the process of wrapping it up in the next 20 years. And the Generation X is pretty much the last generation that's not lazy, because we got a lot of our work ethic from our baby boomer parents. And so baby boomers, for the most part, are out of the workplace. And if they're not, they're getting out of the workplace now. Generations X, it was my generation, we're preparing to get out of the workplace in the next 10 to 20 years. And that leaves the Millennials and Gen Z to carry the workforce. And that ain't happening, folks. If you think that you're going to be running a retail organization here in the United States and depending on these lazy millennials and these lazy Generation Zs to carry your business, think again, because it's not going to happen very well for you. So you either think about putting it in a retail organization like McDonald's, where you're going to be having a lot of robots do a lot of the work, or you need to start thinking about a bigger picture. Like, not only how can you set up shop in a manufacturing situation overseas, and even better, how can you cater to a population of people overseas to sell your product to? These are the types of things you're going to have to start really seriously thinking about if you're going to be making it. We're not talking about 2018 anymore. We're beyond 2018, because to focus on 1 year at a time is kind of foolish in a way. You have to take it by chunks of time. And what I'm actually doing for you now is I'm taking you through not just to 2020, but I'm actually taking you to about 2030 and through to 2040. So if you can start setting things up now in 2018 to 2020 in preparation for how you're going to be doing business in 2030 and 2040, you'll be way ahead of the curve in comparison to everybody else who's going to be setting up their retail storefront shop or trying to set up a manufacturing business here. The other thing too, as it parlays into real estate, you have to also think in terms of how is this going to affect me renting units to people if the vast majority of millennials and Generation Z are still living with their parents because they can't even get a decent job because inflation has been too hard on people being able to make enough money to buy anything, let alone afford housing. How is that going to work its way into housing, and how that's going to be treated and how that's going to be affected? All of these things have to be considered when you're setting yourself up. One of the things I love about the Asian population is that everything that they do is thought out in decades in advance. They're not like the American population where everything's like, well, let's see, what are we going to eat for lunch today? What are we going to eat for dinner today? And it never gets past like 1 or 2 days or even a couple of weeks. But the Asian population, they plan things out meticulously, decades in advance. And this is the type of planning that they do, is thinking about these types of trends that are coming up and how they can best, prepare for them and ideally profit from them. So how you can profit from them is understand that we have a couple of lost generations coming up. We have the Millennials and Generation Z coming up, and a lot of them are going to continue living with their parents for as long as possible. Their parents, which is Generation, X, which is me, and our baby boomer parents, we're going to be dying off. Baby boomers are already starting to die off now, in addition to retiring. So I would say that at least half of that population is retired out and or dying off at this point. So if you're going to be targeting your whole, I guess you could say, business model around baby boomers who have 70% of the expendable disposable income in this country, that's really a dangerous business model to be, banking on, because that business model is going to evaporate within the next 10 years. It's gone as your baby boomers either die or they retire out and they have to drastically pull back the amount of spending power they have. But it's evaporating in 10 years, and 10 years goes by. We all know, anybody who's over 30 knows how fast 10 years goes. It goes by in a blink of an eye. All right. So you have to start thinking, okay, I'm focusing now on Generation X, which is our last stable generation before we get into the millennial disaster. So what are we going to do? It's like, okay, well, you could treat the Gen Xers just like you should treat the baby boomers, except the problem with that is that there's fewer of us to target. So even though we're starting to carry that expendable income power, the problem is our generation doesn't have as many people. And do the research if you don't believe me, but do a comparison between the baby boomer generation and Generation X, and you'll see that the population size is nowhere near what you're going to get with the baby boomer. Now, in the baby boomers' defense, there are several layers of baby boomers as far as age groups go. And I have the feeling that they probably should have sliced that up a little bit better, maybe split baby boomers in half as far as naming the generations, because it captured like a 25-year time frame, which is unheard of when it comes to naming a generation. And they do that on purpose because of a certain reason, as far as, I guess you could say an explosive amount of births that took place in a specific time frame. But it's hard to slice up the baby boomer generation because there's the younger ones and then there's the older ones that are, on death's door, long retired and on death's door at this point. And then you have the younger ones that are still in the workplace. So, and they're barely in the workplace, I should mention, barely in the workplace. So, so that generation's gone. And yet it's really scary to think that they carry about 70% of the disposable expendable income in this country. They carry, over 50% of the wealth in this country. So if we don't have those people as a target, then what are we going to target? So your next target obviously is going to have to be, it's going to have to be a combination of the younger baby boomers and your Generation X population. So let's talk about them. So as I already told you, Generation X is not as large of a population as baby boomers, but we need to start setting things up as our focus. And I strongly recommend now that you start focusing in on apartment buildings and properties that do cater to older people, because pretty soon, let's see, my generation, Generation X, in the next 10 years, we're going to be hitting that 55 range. And so we're going to start becoming the younger senior citizens. God, that's a scary thought. It's not anything I really want to think about at this moment, but it's the reality of how things are. In the next decade, I'm going to start coming up on, pre-retirement years, if you will. That's what I call pre-retirement, is like 55 and up. And I would qualify to live in certain, apartment buildings, for example, that advertise for people that are seniors, because I think the basic qualification factor in most of those buildings that I've dealt with is 55 and up. So you're focusing in now on baby boomers and Generation X, because we're the ones who have the disposable income. And that's where your focus needs to lie. So you're going to start changing what your focus is. It's not just going to be any type of apartment building in a Class C, Class B area. Now you're going to be focusing in on areas in which have, the affinity of attracting older people in retirement mode. So you want to start thinking about areas. If you haven't selected your farming area yet, you might want to start thinking about areas that are real prone to retirement. At pretty much anywhere in the state of Arizona, anywhere in the state of Florida for the most part, certain parts of Texas, especially, the eastern side of Texas. Start thinking about where you would want to go when you're old and gray, because if you live in the northern areas or the Midwest, you probably don't want to stay there. And if you are going to stay there, it's going to be for part of the year. Where would you go? Where would you want to go? And those are the areas that you're going to be focusing in on, starting the process of finding your new farming area for your properties. You're going to literally have to come up with a new strategy now. 2018 is the time. This is the year now where we have to come up with brand new strategies to prepare us and start building our wealth for the long haul, which is going to be the next 10 to 20 years. And if you start thinking, out of your ass at this point and start selecting areas that are just really poor choices in which to select areas for properties, you're going to set yourself up very poorly. Because if you've ever listened to anything that I teach about long-term passive income real estate, is that you're going to be buying and holding these assets forever. And forever for you might be 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. So you do this falls right in line with exactly what I'm talking about, as far as, yes, I know all of this stuff is 10, 20 years away, but you have to set yourself up now today to be able to cash in well as the years go on. Because remember, the millennials, that's a dead generation as far as I'm concerned. Yes, I know everybody can always come up with, one or two millennials that are kicking ass, but that's just by numbers, by percentages, the millennials are going to fail. They're going to fail big time. And unfortunately, if you're a Generation X like I am, or a baby boomer, you're going to be carrying your kids and your grandkids for quite some time. All right. And so that's their economic model, is let mommy and daddy and grandmommy and granddaddy carry me until they die, I guess. And then I'll figure it out at that point. And that's basically their mentality. So if you're in the business of going into newer areas where there's younger people and that's where your business model is, then your business model is not going to work as we enter into the next couple of decades. So again, I want you all to start focusing in on farming areas that are in areas prone to be an attractant of people who are baby boomers who are retiring. And then ultimately, when us Gen Xers become to the age of retirement, where are we going to go? And I'll tell you the different states that I'm actually thinking about. I'm thinking about well, Florida, I used to think about a lot, and then the humidity situation because of the climate change has really gotten out of control. And for those of you that are naysayers on climate change, evidently you haven't gone outside in a while, because every single year I notice some dramatic changes just in Southern California. But I also travel around the world a lot, especially, just around the country. And I've noticed a significant difference just in the last 20 years in how the temperament is in Florida. Florida's temperament is now what it used to be in the Bahamas back in the day, back 20 years ago. When I used to travel to the Bahamas on trips and vacations, the humidity was just unbearable. You could barely breathe. And now all of that is starting to come up to the Florida area. So yes, the planet is really getting warmer. And yes, climate change will actually have an impact on where people ultimately want to move. So here's my thinking process here as a Gen Xer, already preliminarily starting the process of thinking about where I want to go when I retire. And I've thought about Florida and I said no. I've actually thought about Georgia because, I do actually like the state of Georgia. I did a lot of business in Georgia and in the Atlanta area. I really love that area. I love the Carolinas. So these are areas I'm thinking about going when it's time for me to retire and, not have to have my warehouse, office staff, all these other things. Texas I've never been a big fan of, but that's just me personally. It doesn't mean that that's not the case for other people. Arizona, I don't like the fact that I just don't have an ocean or access to an ocean, so that's my personal thing. But I could see why people would want to retire there. There's a lot of areas in Southern California that are not overly pricey and expensive, like in the desert areas, like that people would move to, and it's affordable even for investors to get involved in. So these are the things you need to start thinking about. Where are these people going as they get into retirement, because those are the areas that you want to be invested in. And I know you think that, oh, well, that's 10, 20 years from now. Well, yeah, hello. Everything you invest in today, you're keeping for 10 to 20 years, folks. That's how it works in this business. This is not some flip game where you're in it for, 60 days and you're out. You're in this to win this. You're in this for the long haul. So you have to understand that everything that you purchase, you're going to be keeping for the next 10, 20, 30 plus years, however long you're on this planet until you die. And then your millennial kid or grandkid's going to end up taking it over. They're going to sell it within a couple months, and then they're going to piss away the money in probably about a year after that. But that's not your problem. They're on this earth plane to figure out their own dharma and their own purpose, and that's not your problem as far as, footing the bill and taking care of them long after you die, and probably not even while you're still on this earth either. But, we all have our hang-ups when it comes to our kids and grandkids, because I'll admit that I have my own hang-ups when it comes to my daughter, and, anything she wants, she pretty much gets. So that's how it is. So start thinking about those types of things as we go into 2018. Where do you want your next farming area to be, and how will it go with everything that I just talked about as far as how it's going to lay out in the next 10 to 20 years for baby boomers and for Gen Xers. So start thinking about that as you plan your areas. We're actually now starting the process of going back into Georgia in different areas, not necessarily Atlanta this time, but we're going back into Georgia because it is a rapidly growing state, rapidly growing area. And I think it has a lot to do with your snowbirds going down there, and the same methodology that I just laid out. A lot of them don't like the humidity from Florida. There's a little tiny bit of relief when you go to Georgia. It's not as harsh. Plus you get more of the woodsy feel that a lot of these northerners are used to, the woods and the forests and the stuff that you don't really get in Florida. So that's really a big draw. So that might be one of the states that you consider when you go into real estate in 2018. Remember, we're doing this for the next 10, 20, 30 years. So everything that you do in 2018, you need to be thinking about 10, 20, 30 years from now. Okay, everything that you do, you need to think in terms of the next few decades. All right. So to get the most out of this presentation, what I'm going to be doing is we're going to be going through several areas of the country. Focus on the state that you are interested in investing in only. I don't care if that's your state that you live in now. I don't care if that's a state that's 3,000 miles away from you, but it will be a singular location in which you have an interest in investing, and that's what you're going to be focusing in on. So that's going to alleviate confusion, because I'm going to be showing you several maps as we go along here. And I don't want you to start, writing down all these notes and picking out 20 different areas in which you can invest and then really getting confused and then ending up doing nothing with any of this, because now is the time, if you really want to get involved in long-term real estate investing and you've been kind of, sitting, taking the seat and not sitting on the sidelines and not doing anything, you need to really focus in on whether this is really a business for you or not, because it's either you're going to pull the trigger on this in 2018 or you're just not going to do it at all. And if you don't do it at all, I'm not going to be mad at you. This is not really a business for everyone, but you can't be mad at yourself 5 or 10 years from now when you decide to do nothing because of fear or because thinking that you don't have any money or whatever the lineup of excuses that you have for yourself. There's always a way around everything, absolutely everything. I have money, people, I have resources, I have everything that you'd ever need or want when it comes to investing in real estate. And if you're using that as an excuse, then there's really something wrong with you at this point. All right. And it might be that this is really not the business for you, in which case, again, maybe find a different business that would be better suited for, your liking and your desires. All right. So, you want to take some notes if you can, because I'm going to go through these areas pretty quick. All right. Okay. So opportunities for the United States in 2018, pretty much all areas are green to go. At this point. Now, every area is going to suffer different, I guess you could say, challenges, if you will, as time goes on. The recession that we're hitting up against soon has already started taking place in areas like California, New York, major metropolitan areas where there's been a slowdown. We started to feel the crunch. And we're probably going to see a drop soon, all right? But here's the deal. Here's why I'm telling you all areas are green to go. Because what you're going to be focusing in on for the first couple of quarters of 2018 isn't really acquisitions, rather than lining things up. You want to start lining up your farming area. You want to start really doing some research and digging down and drilling down to figure out everything about your area that you've selected. You're going to start lining up investors. You're going to start fixing your credit if your credit is not good, so that you can get the best possible commercial mortgage qualification. So these are the things you're going to be focusing in on for the first half of 2018. In the meantime, the market's going to do what it's going to do, and you're going to start to see that there's going to be some changes that are going to occur. Now, here's why we don't want to wait until everything's going to hell in a handbasket, everybody's screaming for the hills, and everybody's just in a full-blown panic. Because when you don't have your head screwed on straight, unfortunately, you miss the opportunities. You become a fearmonger like everybody else. You end up doing nothing, and then you have nothing to show for it a decade later. All right. So what you're doing is preparing. You're like the squirrel. You're taking all the nuts and you're putting them in a hole in the ground somewhere, and you're preparing for the calamity and the disaster. And it's probably not going to be as bad as 2008, probably not anywhere near that, but it is coming. And like I said, it's already been happening in areas like California and New York for a little while now, actually a little over a year. So we tend to be the market pioneers, or the ones that kind of predict or help predict the rest of what's going to happen in the rest of the country. We have a different type of bubble going on. I talked about it in the last Viper Wealth, where it's the credit bubble, but it's not the real estate credit bubble. It's a different type of bubble, and it almost kind of goes in hand with what I was talking about with your millennials, in that they're not making enough money. They're overextending themselves. So there's a lot of credit card debt. There's a lot of student loan debt. There's a lot of subprime credit debt, payday loan debt, all of this debt that people are unable to keep up with. And there's a credit bubble that's about to burst right now. So again, it's completely different than the last bubble, which we had was a subprime bubble. So kind of the same types of customers, if you will, that were part of the subprime prime credit bubble. But instead of it involving real estate, it's just going to involve student loans. It's going to involve, people paying on their car payments, their car lease payments, and their credit card payments, and all these payday loan payments. All of these things are going to start to collapse. In fact, the collapse started happening about a year ago when a couple of the major banks had already come out with reports. I believe it was after third quarter 2016 when they started talking about how there was a problem where the credit bubble was about to burst because they were having issues where people were just not paying on their credit cards. In the fourth quarter of 2016, they started to have record numbers of repossessions on cars that they hadn't seen in several years before. So it's already happening, all right, with the credit bubble. It's already starting to burst. So I don't know where that's going to go. I'm not sure how badly it's going to affect the real estate market, but my prediction is it's not going to be as bad again as 2008, because 2008, everything was tied directly to real estate. This time, it's not tied to real estate. It's more of non-collateralized loans, except for cars, which obviously are collateralized with the vehicle. But mostly it's student loans and payday loans and credit cards, unsecured credit cards, which are all non-collateralized credit, which isn't, as far as I could see, going to affect the real estate market like maybe some people are predicting. It's going to affect the market in different ways, all right? So again, we're not really looking at another 2008 as far as real estate. So I'd hate to see everybody sitting around waiting for all these foreclosures to take place when there will be foreclosures here and there, but it's not going to be the way it was in 2008. You need to start ramping things up and getting ready to go now, because when you do it this way, then when the opportunities start falling at your feet, you have the ability to take advantage because you already have the investor partners lined up, you already have the cash lined up, you already have your farming area picked out, you've already been doing research, you already have your eye on several properties that are on the market, you've already been scouring the marketplace with letter campaigns, you already have different sellers that are willing to sell their building to you that are pocket listings. You have all this stuff going on before there's a collapse of anything. The last thing you want to do is be part of everybody getting involved in something when there's just chaos everywhere, because that's usually when it's way too late for you to take advantage, because that's when all the serious investors are swooping in on everything because they have the cash to take advantage of stuff. And they keep a very level head and they go in and they swoop up on everything while everybody else is screaming and running for the hills. So that's not going to be you this time. And again, we're not looking at a replay of 2008. As far as I could see, of course, I could be completely wrong. I don't have a crystal ball. But the way I could see the credit thing happening, it's just not the same thing as 2008. It's a different type of credit issue, different type of credit bubble that we're having. And yes, some of it will be attached to real estate, but for the most part, it's probably not going to be. All right. So let's just keep that in mind. Okay, mobile home parks. So I know some of you are interested in getting involved in mobile home parks. Let me tell you why this is a really good investment strategy. In fact, quite possibly for me, it could be one of the most powerful and valuable investment strategies that you could get involved in. Because remember what I was telling you about focusing in on your baby boomers that are younger and your Gen Xers and where they're going to be in 10 to 20 years from now. And for the ones that are left standing and still alive on this planet, what are they going to be doing? Where are they going to be living? And how can you best monetize that? Mobile home parks is one of those assets where a lot of baby boomers are retiring out to mobile home parks just because it's just much more affordable. People are living longer. They understand that whatever they have in their nest egg for their retirement savings has to last them a lot longer. And so mobile home parks allow them to do this. Now, we're not talking about low grade, class D, Hickville type of, mobile home, basically trailer parks, permanent trailer parks. We're not talking about that. We're talking about something a little bit higher end, where instead of dealing with trailers, which I can't stand that term. I cannot stand those types of parks where they're actually trailers that are peeled off from the axle and just basically tossed onto a pad. Mobile home parks, the future is going to be about actual mobile units, okay? These are going to be mobile units that are actually built on the property. And let me tell you about the mechanics of this versus a trailer. Let's forget about the trailer that actually is registered with the Department of Motor Vehicles or whatever the state is that oversees car registrations. That's what a trailer is to me. We're not talking about trailers anymore. Mobile home parks, what you need to focus in on, there's going to be a new trend that I want you to become involved in, and that is actual mobile units that are built on the property. So these are properties that it's almost like a it's a mobile unit. It's like a manufactured house where there's pieces of the house that are already pre-built somewhere else in some warehouse, and all of these parts of the house are shipped to one location, and it's actually built on a pad. So it's a hybrid between a mobile home and it's actually a manufactured house. This is the trend of mobile home parks that you need to focus in on, and let me tell you why. When you deal with a trailer technically can be up and moved away somewhere if somebody decides that they don't want to pay you pad rent anymore. Now, if you're not familiar with mobile home parks, you don't typically own the units. The person who put their trailer on the property owns the trailer, and you just get something called pad rent from them, meaning that they're renting the lot space from you every single month, which includes power, which includes water. So you do have to give them that. You have to provide sewage. You also have to provide, the infrastructure, which means that you need to make sure that the roads are, paved and, that they have, landscaped, I guess you could say, areas and, picnic areas and all that good stuff. So you need to make sure that all of that stuff is taken care of. That's part of your responsibility as a mobile home park unit owner, or rather mobile home park owner. And so you need to really, this is again a completely different animal than apartment buildings, okay? So for this, what's cool about having the mobile units that they have to build on the property is that with the mobile units, you need to understand that they can't move those. I mean, they can, but it costs about $5,000 to $7,000 to actually be able to move a mobile unit, okay? Versus just being able to just throw wheels back on the trailer and just off you go into the sunset. So there's a completely different dynamic. So people that are laying their mobile unit onto a mobile pad that you have in your mobile home park, they're there forever. They're not going anywhere, okay? And so you have to understand that these people are going to be there for the rest of their lives. And so you collect the pad rent. They own the actual unit. So the cool thing about that also, too, is that there's no maintenance cost in the unit. If their refrigerator breaks, so be it. If their microwave breaks, so be it. And by the way, I'm used to working with units that actually have a refrigerator that we install for them. And we actually charge an extra $20 a month for the refrigerator, in which case when it breaks, we do need to replace it. Same with the microwave. A lot of the microwaves that we install into the units are actually in the part of the stove unit, and when that breaks, we have to replace that as well. So you don't have to do any of that stuff. Their plumbing breaks inside their unit, that's on them. They cover all of that stuff. So it's like a hybrid apartment building, hybrid. So you have the best of both worlds. You have the lowest maintenance cost. Usually to operate an apartment building, it's about 45% to 55% of the gross operating income that goes back out in expenses. With mobile home parks, it's about 25 to 35% in expense ratio, which is a lot lower, which means the more profits in your pocket. So this is the best trend that you need to focus in on, because a lot of the baby boomers and Gen Xers that want to save money and don't want to, live high on the hog and waste the rest of their their retirement nest egg on, on a piece of property and in a house and property taxes, they're going to go with mobile home park units. So let's focus on the states. There's 4 major states in which to focus in on mobile home parks. There's California, there's Arizona, Texas, and Florida. Those 4 states have the highest population of mobile home parks. The rest of the states, you'll have some, but your highest concentration is going to be in California, Arizona, Texas, and Florida. And then you have other states like Nevada, for example, that come in, Nevada and like Oklahoma that come in as a close second under that umbrella. So those are the states that you really need to focus in on if in fact you are interested in mobile home parks, because that's again where all the snowbirds are going to be coming down. That's again where people are going to be looking to retire. You can even add, Georgia in there and other states that are warmer, where people are going to be looking for mobile home units to retire and live out their days, on a lower budget. So that is a trend as well that you need to really focus in on. Let's talk about other trends here. All right. Now, this is going to be an immediate trend between now and the next couple of years. In fact, it's been a trend that we've actually been on for the last couple of years, and that is taking small apartment buildings. Usually we take an apartment building 12 units or less. We will rehab it. It's usually 0% occupied. Sometimes it's 50% occupied, somewhere between 0 and 50% usually. And then we go ahead and rehab it, and then we lease it up, and we'll either sell it or we'll actually hold it, depending on whether or not it's actually part of our strategy in that area. Because not every area is part of our strategy. Not every so for example, this is what I do in the greater Michigan area. Lately, I have not been doing buy and hold properties there because I don't trust Michigan. I love the state of Michigan. I think it's a beautiful, gorgeous state, but I don't particularly trust what's going on there. And it's the economic situation. It's the loss of population, especially in the greater Detroit area. They're still losing population size. And they've been trying to build up and rebuild in the greater Detroit area, especially. You have a lot of millionaires and billionaires that have been putting a lot of money into that area, trying to attract additional investors, probably internationally as well as nationally, to keep dumping money. But the problem is they're still losing population. The other problem, if you've ever talked to anyone in law enforcement who's serious about, understanding the infrastructure of law enforcement, the state of Michigan, especially the greater Detroit area, Wayne County, they're not putting any additional money into the infrastructure of police, fire, the school system, that kind of thing. So even if you were say you were a cutting edge tech company and you decided, hey, Michigan, I can go there, I can get this awesome loft, old loft warehouse building in downtown Detroit. Downtown Detroit is beautiful, by the way, if you've ever been there lately. It's not like anything that you probably think it is, especially the way the news casts Detroit. I've been to Detroit many, 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 dozens and dozens of times just in the last couple of years. And I love downtown Detroit. It's a beautiful city, and it's even getting better and better as time goes on. So you might think, oh, I'm a tech company, and I'm gonna actually move my whole company to Detroit because less taxes, better infrastructure, brand new, rebuilt out building on the inside. But the problem is, none of your employees are going to want to bring their kids to that area, because they haven't done much or anything to the school system. They have one of the worst school systems in the entire United States. They have to have metal detectors as you walk into the school. There's just so many issues with the school system. They're working on the police and fire infrastructure. They have a really good police department, I should say. But they can't stop the crime all over the city. And there's just a lot of crime over there that's just it's kind of being swept under the rug. So there's issues with that. There's issues with that basic infrastructure. And had I not been in the city so many years with the different real estate deals I've done, I would have never known any of that. I would have probably been sucked in like any other investor, on the glory of, them rebuilding the broken down city and how proud they all are of that, which is all fine and well. But unfortunately, at the end of the day, you have to have a population size and you have to have a base infrastructure for people to want to come in and do business there. And they just don't have that. And they're never going to have that until they start breaking down the bottom and working their way up. You can't work your way from the top to the bottom. That's just not how it works. And that's how they're doing it, is they're working it from the top to the bottom. They're fixing the buildings first, hoping, oh, well, if we build it, they will come. Well, the problem is you have to fix the bottom to bottom to the top, meaning you have to fix your base infrastructure first, your school system, your, fire, police department, all that stuff. Your government has to be fixed first from the bottom up, and then you can have the people come in. So they're not doing it that way. And so that's why I've always adopted this strategy, especially in the last few years, where I'm just doing really small apartment building and even single family home, rehab and lease up and then flip that. So that's a really good, but again, it wouldn't be your end strategy. It doesn't have to be your main farming area. And what we've done is worked on these types of properties in Michigan and then worked on our farming areas that we're in and dumped the money into the farming areas. I have a couple different farming areas that I'm in, and I dumped the money into the buy and hold assets in the different farming area. And the different farming area is not even in the same state. As you know, I live in California. I work on property deals in Michigan, and a lot of these flip deals are in Michigan. I've done flip deals in Indiana and Ohio. And then I'll work on our buy and hold assets, I have some that are in Texas, but I do have those with, I should say, with investors. They're not wholly mine. And then also, too, we've been doing investor partnerships in the Phoenix, Arizona area. And then I'm going back into the greater Atlanta area to focus in on the long-term acquisitions there. We've also done some property deals in northern Florida that we have a farming area in the Tallahassee area as well as the Jacksonville area. So that's where our buy and hold assets are. So you do the flip deal somewhere else, and then you can use the flip money to fund your buy and hold assets. All right. So it doesn't have to all be in one area. So here we go with buy and hold assets. What are the best areas? If you can get into California, that's great, but I don't really recommend it. Again, I live in California, and I have been hard pressed to find any deals that I could make cash flow here without putting at least 50% cash down. The cap rates are really, really low, but there are certain areas you can make work. It's just I've never been motivated to make it work because I don't like the areas personally, and I feel that you do have to like the area that you're going into to make it work, because then you'll be more motivated and enthusiastic to make it work. But there are areas in California that you can make work, like Riverside, San Bernardino counties. You can make Fresno work. You can make, certain areas around Sacramento work. So there are areas like Stockton where the cash flows could work. But I don't like any of those areas, and I would never invest in any of those areas. Very difficult to make Oregon and Washington state work. But again, if you're away from the bigger cities, like if you're away from Seattle and around in the outskirts, you can actually make some of the cash flows work really well. Same with the areas around Portland, Oregon, away from this big city, you can make that work. But I would recommend that you stay away from the big city areas, stay away from the Pacific Rim altogether, and then you have your bigger areas. I don't like Nevada at all. However, I have a couple students that are doing exceptionally well in the greater Las Vegas area. They're doing really well with the cash flows. Me personally, I have issues with Vegas, and this was way before the shooting. Anybody who's known me knows that I can't stand Vegas. I feel like it's a really low energy place, and I tend to be very sensitive when it comes to very low, depressing energy areas. And Vegas is one of those areas for me. I just have an issue with areas like that, and it seems to be getting worse and worse as time goes on. In addition to that, the reason I took it off this map for now is that one of the things that gets hit first and hardest when we go into a new recession is the entertainment and gambling industry. So now I wouldn't want to see you go into this in 2018. Now, if you want to go in 2019 or 2020, that's a different story. We'll talk about it then. But as far as for 2018, I would recommend that you maybe take a step back from that area unless you live there and you really want to make the area work, because you can look at properties and you're right on top of it, and you can facilitate the deals that way. If you don't live there, then I would not recommend you tinker around with the Vegas area unless you already have property that's there. Phoenix, Arizona, overpriced, and so are the areas around it. But it would probably be a really good area. Like I said, we have partnership deals in different areas of Arizona, mostly concentrated around the Phoenix area. It's a very progressive city. I was just there a couple weeks ago, and they're really doing a lot of building. And it's one of those areas that really do attract a lot of the older population. It reminds me of a Palm Springs in Arizona. That's kind of what it reminded me of, just a little bit newer in some areas. So you might really want to consider that, especially if you live in Arizona. It's really going to be up and coming for the next several decades, and it's going to always attract your older population. So you really can't go wrong with the state of Arizona. You really can't. New Mexico, I added that in there, even though it's really difficult to find property in New Mexico because there's really not a lot of inventory. But it's also going to be one of those areas where a lot of people are going to be kind of attracted to going, not as heavy as Texas or Arizona, but you're going to have people that are attracted to going there as they get older. So you can probably see a lot of the green areas around, and you're probably wondering why I did some of the northern areas up there. There's some new development as far as I want to say drilling pipelines, different things that they're doing in different areas of the country, which is why I kind of green lighted a lot of the areas that you're seeing there. There's different economic trends in technology as well in certain areas that are kind of shocking different areas that you would not think that they're doing. Like, for example, I was just reading the other day, I think it was one of the off the wall Dust Bowl states that actually had this really centralized tech area. And then I was talking to somebody from a boot camp that I attended on copywriting who's in Kansas, and he said it's very up and coming in Kansas. Really good area, he says, to raise a family. Just really low crime rate. But there's a lot of progression going on with real estate. Your middle America wanting to settle in these areas that are away from heavy crime, away from heavy populations, and it's a lot more affordable to operate there as a family unit. So that's one of the areas that you should consider as well. I was just in Chicago about a month ago maybe. It was a month ago. And, I was listening to the cab driver who was from, I don't know, Haiti or someplace, and he was bitching and complaining about how the city's changed in the last couple of years. And I was driving around in the car, and I noticed that it actually looked a lot better than the last time I had been there. And in that particular area of Chicago I was in, the last time I was there, I was 16 years old, 15 or 16. So that's a lot of years. It's 25 plus years had gone by, and it looks a lot better. Before, when I was driving through it, I mean, you had graffiti all over the front of the buildings, you had barred up windows, and then it wasn't the same when I drove through this last time. So I think I had a longer span of how things looked than this guy who was just barely new to the U.S. and only lived in Chicago for 5 years. I had a better perspective on how things were. So there are areas that are getting better in the city of Chicago, but then, you have the crime, and you have a lot of people that are escaping that. For the first time ever, Chicago's actually losing population. Now they're losing single digit numbers. But over time, this is how Detroit started. This is how Cleveland started. Now, obviously, Chicago is a lot larger in size than both of those cities put together, but this is how it starts. It starts with people thinking, I can go to a different area where it's a lot warmer and there's no crime. And I was also talking to somebody who owns property in Chicago, and he was saying that the property taxes are just absolutely freaking outrageous. It was actually comparable to Southern California property taxes. In fact, his small condo was about the same as what I pay for, my house, which is $1 million property. So it's just I was just mind boggled by what the hell's going on with the tax situation in Cook County in Chicago, and they're just going to drive people out. They're going to drive good people out because anybody who's got money is not going to want to stay there. They're not going to want to deal with the crime and the cold and all the other crap that goes along with it. So you're going to find that they're going to continue losing population. So if you're in other areas, like for example, we've done recently an investor partnership in Peoria, Illinois. There's areas in the western suburbs, even going out west outside of Cook County, from Chicago, that you can actually make money with property deals. But again, I wouldn't recommend that you do this unless you actually live in that area. Other areas to consider: Florida, obviously, but the northern part, like Jacksonville, Tallahassee. I would stay away from the coast for a variety of different reasons, but the main reason is climate change. You saw how badly they got beat up, and this was stuff I've been warning people about for years. That's why we pulled out of the Panama City area. There was just too many issues with climate. issues with the oil spill. That was back when the BP oil spill took place. That's when we first pulled out. We lost a lot of, tenants and stuff because people had to move on. Their main thing is tourism, and you can't have tourism there if you have, oil slicks on the beach. You know what I mean? So we had to and Panama City's okay now, but it's really gotten run down in the last couple of decades. But we don't deal with the coast anymore of Florida. Orlando is always going to be pretty solid, but it's kind of higher priced. But I would rather see you do Orlando, than I would rather see you do like the Gulf somewhere, like Clearwater. Although Clearwater is still a good high population concentration area, as well as Tampa and St. Petersburg for your older population. So if you live there, and you could deal with getting beat up. I mean, that would be an area of Florida that would not get hit as hard when hurricanes come through as, say, the outside, the Atlantic side. So that's something you can consider. If you wanted to actually do the coast of Florida somewhere and invest there, then you would best be in St. Pete, Tampa, Clearwater area, because that's where your older population is going to continue to go. And that's where the money is, folks. I'm telling you, that's where the future is. That's where the trends are. That's where you need to be, is where all of these older people with expendable, disposable income are going. We're not concentrating on millennials because they're useless and they have no money, and they're not going to have any money for quite some time. And the only money they're probably going to end up getting is when their baby boomer, Gen X, or parents die. So we need to concentrate on the people who have the dough, all right? You can also do the Carolinas, even though they're overpriced. You could consider those areas. The Midwest is always pretty solid for any kind of area. I mean, we always make a lot of money whenever we do deals in Indiana, specifically Indiana and Ohio. I don't really know why those are sweet spots, but those are really good solid. Again, you want to stick with the major cities. We're not going into two-horse towns anywhere. You have to have a population size of over 250,000 for it to be worthwhile for you to even want to invest there. But there's a lot of money still to be made in those areas, especially if you live there. I'm not a big fan of the East Coast because mostly it's just overpriced like it is with California. But again, if you live there, it doesn't hurt to look. You know what I mean? So that's my assessment with assets and buy and hold. Now, this is the decision you have to make that has to be more fine-tuned and well thought out than your flipping conversation that you have for yourself. So when you talk about flipping, you could pretty much flip anywhere because you're in and out of a deal just like that. And there's no long-term commitment to the deal or to the area. But when you deal with apartment buildings, the buy and hold assets, remember a lot of these assets you're going to be holding for the next 10 to 20 years minimum, if not more. So not only are you going to be picking out a singular location, meaning it's just one location, and then eventually you can, do two that are relatively close. That's part of the reason why I decided to do the Tallahassee, Jacksonville areas, because they're relatively close, and then I'm going to be adding on Atlanta up here shortly, because again, they're all kind of relatively close. But I don't recommend that you do more than one. And so you need to be very carefully selective as far as what that one is going to be, because not only do we need to talk about the population size of 250,000 or above, and your average cap rate being, 8.5 or above, which is the basics that we specifically look for. Also to the inventory availability, we also look for that as well. When we do a basic search on LoopNet or cityfeet.com, we want to make sure that we have some properties, at least 30 plus properties in the apartment building category to even put offers in on. So those are the three criteria. Now we're adding another one. We're adding criteria number 4, and that is we need people with money who are retiring out in these areas, who are going to be giving us rent for probably till the day they die. Where are these people going? And I just explained to you at the very beginning of this where these people are going. They're definitely going to the warmer climates, and they're going to more of your B class areas. So you're probably going to be looking at, in the very least, lowest grade property you'll get is going to be now a C plus property, and the very highest you'll get is probably a B plus or a B minus. That's what we're looking at. We have to start shifting. So yes, you're going to be paying more money. Yes, you're going to be getting less of a cash flow in the very beginning. However, over the long term, you're going to be making up on that because you're going to be able to make the money back plus some in both the appreciation as well as the increased cash flow, plus the stability of your tenants, not having to fight people for, a money order from Circle K every month. that's always 10 days late, like we generally have to do with a lot of our properties. Instead, we have the money there on the first of the month every single month without flinching, an eyebrow, you know what I mean? So, these are the offsets that you have to consider when you're paying more money for an apartment building. Less stress versus more stress. More cash flow equals more stress in some cases. A little bit less cash flow equals less stress because you have less of those stressful tenants that you have to deal with. People trying to, flush down crack pipes down the toilet. Believe it or not, we've had those issues too. And then that's a plumbing problem, and it's a costly plumbing problem when it gets stuck and you can't get it out. And, you have to think in terms of, do I want to deal with those tenants, or do I want to deal with, the old blue-haired lady that's going to pay me every month and she's not going to be, flushing crack pipes down the toilet? That's a question you need to ask yourself, and if it's worth the extra money or not. Commercial assets, buy and hold. Now, if you're ever going to do buy and hold, remember the conversation we had at the very beginning of this presentation where I'm speaking in terms of what's going to be left here in the United States. Now, I know the President of the United States talked a really good game when he was campaigning about bringing manufacturing back to the United States, but you could probably tell that he hasn't had that conversation at all since he's been in office. And there's a reason for that. Reason one is that all of his manufacturing takes place overseas, and he knows that it's just not a doable, fiscal situation to do it here in the U.S. But two, he understands that most American companies can't manufacture here in the U.S. because it's just not affordable. You can't sell a broom at Walmart for $5 and have a bunch of union employees in Texas making those brooms all day and be able to turn them out and sell them for $5 for a profit. It's just simply not possible. I mean, we have too many taxes, too many insurance requirements, too much unemployment we got to pay out, all this stuff we got to pay out, plus, wages. And then if it's a union employee, that's even worse because the wages are triple what we normally would have to pay, even more than that sometimes. So it's just not doable in this country. And as I just also explained too, we're not going to have very many Americans that are going to want to make anything because we have all of our baby boomers exiting the workforce as we speak. The remaining balance of them will be exiting in the next 10 years or less. Then you have the Gen Xers, which is your last generation that wants to actually roll up their sleeves and physically work. And there's not nearly as many of us as there were the baby boomers, but we're still left. And there's just not a large enough workforce of us that are willing to work, roll up our sleeves and do anything. Millennials are a lost generation and they're lazy as hell. And then you have Generation Z, which is my daughter's generation. They're probably going to follow in the steps of the millennials, just not wanting to do much of any physical labor. So all your physical labor is going to have to end up overseas. And I was talking to one of my staffers today about actually opening up a manufacturing plant in Mexico, because anytime I've ever had a Mexican worker do anything, they're hard workers. They work, they come in early, they stay late, they try to work through their lunch until they get yelled at because we don't want to be in violation of any, labor laws. So we always have to pull them back and get them off. I mean, like today I had to get Patty and I had to tell her, you got to stop doing this. You have to go eat your lunch, because she just wanted to work through lunch. And, but that's just how the Hispanic population tends to be. They're very hard workers. So a lot of these manufacturers that are currently manufacturing here in the U.S. are going to start going to places like Mexico. I know I will. Because I'm not going to be fighting with a bunch of millennials that want to be on their phone all day. I want to be dealing with people that are going to be working for my company and working for the wages that I'm paying them. In addition to that, having a Mexican manufacturing company, you have no property taxes. You usually pay for your building in all cash, which is but a fraction of what you'd pay for a building here. You don't have any of the insurance. I mean, you have some insurance, but you don't have the employee types of insurance requirements and all the different things that you're required to have and do here in the U.S., making it, unfortunately, a very user unfriendly place to do business here. So with that said, you have to now think in terms of where are our trends again going in the next 10 to 20 years, because that's the point where we're going to start at. So your big manufacturing plants are going overseas. Just pretend like they're gone already. They might as well be gone. So what do we have left? Well, you have retail storefronts that are always going to be around, but you're not going to be dealing with giants like Walmart or giants like a mall, for example. Those are all going to be gone. You're not really going to have huge superstores. So you're going to have a lot of service-oriented retail storefronts, like nail salons, like hair salons. Like, you're always going to have that. You're always going to have your medical around, your small medical to your large medical. That will always be around. You're also going to have your startup businesses, that need between 1 and 2,000 square feet. You're also going to always need self-storage. People are going to always store their stuff. So you need to start thinking about all the stuff that's going to be around in 10 to 20 years from now. And industrial warehouse doesn't meet the grade. Yes, you can have industrial warehouse as long as you have really small, what we call industrial warehouse condos. They're usually about 1,000 to 1,500 square feet. If you can get a bunch of those, then you're golden. But you should not be getting anything larger than 2,000 square feet or above for your industrial warehouse condos, period, ever, as part of your business strategy. Same with your office space. You're always going to need office space, but again, there's going to be the smaller office space. So anything between 500 square feet to 1,500 square feet, even 1,500 square feet is kind of pushing it. They usually sit on the market too long. But if you have 500 to 1,000 square feet, smaller office units, those will always be in demand. All right. It's just when you start to get to the larger units that they sit longer and longer and longer. So that will always be in demand. Small retail storefronts that service mom and pop type of businesses will always be in demand, because you're always going to have a nail salon. You're always going to have a hair salon. You're always going to have those types of mom and pop store, the ice cream store, all that stuff is going to always be around. All right. So these are the types of things you need to think about when we're going into this new age. We're leaving, obviously we left the industrial age a long time ago. We're starting to leave the technology age. We're going to be going into a different type of age coming up here, where it's more of a global age. So you have to think, what can the U.S. continue to service, to use to service their residents? And it's going to be things that have to do with, services. And it's going to be small mom and pop services that are going to be around. So think in terms of that if you are interested in getting commercial assets. These should be in addition to your main asset base, which will be mobile home parks and apartment buildings. So say, for example, you select a farm area like Tallahassee, for example. So you might choose, well, your first apartment building will be maybe a 12 unit. Then maybe the second one will be a 30 unit. And the third one will be, maybe a 50 unit. And then all of a sudden you decide you want to pick up a mobile home park in there in Tallahassee. So you have maybe, say, 100 pad mobile home park. And then all of a sudden there's a small retail storefront that comes on the market. And then each unit is between, say, 700 and 1,000 units, and there's, say, 10 of them, and you want to get this little strip mall. That would be okay. But usually your commercial assets are about 10, no more than 25% of your total asset base. So keep that in mind, that it's just a small part, because when you're hit with a huge recession, your retail storefronts and your industrial warehouses and your office units all get hit the hardest. And if you're not willing or able financially to deal with a total walkout of all of your tenants on all of those units, then you probably shouldn't have that many. So in all due honesty, if you can keep it to 10% or less, then all the better. This should not be your main go-to asset class. This should not be your main wheelhouse, if you will. I do not recommend that. Now, my star student, Andrew Shaw, uses it as his main wheelhouse because he has a different strategy. He uses it more like a business. He gets a lot of office buildings and he converts them into buildings for therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists, and he builds them out for a specific type of, I guess you could say, I don't even want to call it medicine, because it's really not medicine, but it's for a specific category of profession is what it is. And he has to build those units out specifically for psychiatrists, therapists, those types of people that, use those units. He also now has a building for lawyers, and it's all catered to lawyers. And he's doing really well with that as well, because there's always going to be lawyers, unfortunately. But he has a different type of strategy. He uses it as both, and I even think one of the stories in one of his buildings is a virtual office. I gave them that idea to use it as a virtual office, so that people that want an address in a specific area of the country, I think it's in his Indianapolis location that he has in Indiana, he has a virtual office there on the top floor of one of his buildings, and he just, that's a service. It's actually a business. It's not even, passive income. So he has a different strategy, and he's the only he's the only recommended strategy that I would use if you're going to be doing only commercial. Otherwise, it should be 10% or less of your asset base, and it should not be something you're out looking for. It should be something that just drops in your lap, that you just add to your asset base, but the rest of your asset base needs to be small apartment buildings and mobile home parks, all right? Let's talk about self-storage really quick. Self-storage is always going to be around. They do better whenever there is a recession because people will downsize from a larger house to an apartment unit, and they always want to keep their stuff because there's always a psychological attachment to keeping all their stuff. So they will always get self-storage units, and they tend to do better in recessions, but they tend to do better all the time. They do really well all the time, but they do really, really, really good during a recession. So self-storage can pretty much do well anywhere in the country. I made some recommendations just because there's higher populations in the areas that I've listed there that I'm showing there. Also, too, when people are having economic problems in one area of the country, they tend to start looking for opportunities in the larger cities and the warmer climates, which is the ones that I kind of pointed to. And then that's when they're going to drive through town, find themselves a self-storage until they find themselves a decent house out of their starter house in the starter location, and go from there. So that's why I kind of green highlighted, but it could technically do well anywhere. If you wanted to get into self-storage. This is a different animal, just like mobile home parks are. Where self-storage, you don't want to build from the ground up because just permitting alone takes 18 to 24 months just to get a permit in many cases. Not in all areas of the country, but some areas of the country, it takes a really long time to get permitting out for it because it's a different type of zoning that has to occur. It's not just a straight commercial zoning, and it's certainly not a residential, commercial, or residential zoning. So there's a zoning requirement. So there's just different things going on with self-storage. So it would be one of those things where if you were interested in commercial, but you really didn't want to get involved in or deal with the risk in commercial, you can actually very well add self-storage to your assets. But again, this is a business. You have a front office. There's a person who answers the phone and sells people bubble wrap and tape and boxes. It's a business. It's kind of like a hybrid passive income / business. So you have to understand that this is a business. It's really not a passive income, but it's definitely something you could add on. So you really can't go wrong when you have darker population areas. You can't go wrong with those states. In any of the areas that you want to consider investing in. But again, find areas that you first have an affinity for, then that fall into the basic 3 criteria, which is that there's population size of 250,000 or more, that you have at least 30 to 50 listings in that particular category. So if you're looking for apartment buildings, you want to have at least 30 to 50, listed on LoopNet or CityFeet. And then the average cap rate, the quick and dirty cap rate, needs to be 8 to 9% on average on the low end. You have that. And then on top of that, we're adding a 4th criteria now, of adding the areas in which people that are retiring out or Gen Xers that are going to want to retire out in the next 20 years, where they're going to go, where they're going to want to live. And that's the 4th criteria that we're adding there. So, these are your states that are poised for the greatest growth in the next 12 years. I should have added South Carolina. I meant to add the Carolinas there. Let me go back for a second. So these are your areas. This is just based on research. This is not cut and dry. This is not set in stone, but these are poised for the next, for the next 12 years, which your biggest population growths are going to be. This is based on charts and graphs and other things that I can't still to this moment figure out, but experts in the field of real estate believe that these are your these are your states to focus in on. So rules of thumb. Here, medical, dental, office buildings are always good. Medicine will always be around, always, always, always. Retail storefront, there should be an anchor, which is a larger store in there, because otherwise these smaller retail storefront strip malls don't tend to work out as well if there's not an anchor store in there. You want industrial warehouse space that can be broken down a lot less than 5,000. I would take 5,000 and break that down to 1,000 square footers, but you definitely want, the point is you want smaller units. Single family, buy and hold. If you're ever going to do buy and hold for single family, you want to be able to pay cash. You don't want to be holding mortgages on any single family properties because the risk is too high when your renters don't pay anymore. Rehabbing, and then either flipping or doing buy and hold. C-class areas is going to be your worst area. You can build from the ground up pretty much anywhere, but you want to focus on smaller buildings like your quads, which are your fourplexes, or you could do completely vacant apartment buildings. I like warmer areas like Texas or Georgia or Florida where, you can actually do the rehab year round rather than, only having a few months out of the year to do the rehab like you do in places like Michigan, for example. All right. So I'm going to quickly go through this because let's go. 2,000 a year. Okay, so this is where we are. 2018 is a year of small apartment buildings. You could even add mobile home parks to that as well, but this is your year of acquiring small apartment buildings. This is where you want to focus. And again, it needs to be on that area in which the 4 criteria that we talked about. All right. And, small, mid-size. We don't want super large. We just want small to mid-size buildings is what we are looking at. All right. And, 5 to 20 units is your average. Sometimes you're going to go 24, sometimes you're going to go 50, but your sweet spot is going to be between 5 and 20 or 24 units. All right. You want to stabilize the investments, obviously, by, rehabbing if necessary and then leasing them up. You can flip your buildings in 90 days in some cases and then take the cash and then, like every other property, you could do like a buy and hold if you wanted to pay off your properties faster or have more assets that are all paid off. All right. So that's a strategy as well. And then, whenever you get involved in any kind of commercial assets, you should only focus on small units, whether they're office or industrial warehouse, because all your larger industries are going to be going overseas. That's the only way that they're going to be affordably able to manufacture. All right. Now, for those of you that are willing and able and wanting to go onto my fast track, I'm doing an apprenticeship group for 2018. The last time I did an apprenticeship group was 2010. That was the only apprenticeship group we did. We ended up buying properties together as a group, and we actually profited quite a bit. In fact, I have the story in a download report that I want you to get and take a look at for those of you that are interested in possibly signing up as an apprentice for 2018. I'm probably not going to be doing any more apprenticeship groups after 2018. Again, this is the second one in 8 years. So I don't do these very often. And for those of you that really want to be taken under my wing and given point by point instruction, we do meetings and we do webinars, private webinars together. We do all these different things. We actually invest in property together. If you really feel that you need that kick in the ass because you've been waiting too long to finally get off your ass and do something, and there's just not the confidence or the resources or whatever the issue is, I bring all of that to the table for you. So you might want to consider that, because I'm starting to take applications in the next couple weeks for the apprenticeship group, and everybody who's part of my Viper Wealth group gets first dibs on slots. Because I have very limited slots that are available for the apprenticeship because I don't take too many people. All right. Okay, everybody. So you guys have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. The next time I'll talk to you, it'll be a brand new 2018. And I just hope you are all happy, healthy, and prosperous for this next coming year. This is Monica Mean signing off, and I'll see you at the top.